Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's SAP Community Call. My name is Jennifer Machado, and I'm a part of the SAP Community team. Today, I'm your host, and our topic of the session is enabling your workforce for success using SAP Enable Now. As always, this call is a recorded session, and you will be able to access all replays and previous SAP Community Calls, including this one, at community.sap.com under the Events tab. Our speaker for this session is Jesse Bernal. And now before I hand it over to Jesse, I'd like to make you aware of the Q&A button where you can already raise questions during the presentation. And after the presentation, we will reserve some time to answer as many questions as we can. And now, Jesse, I'd like to hand it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Jennifer. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Enable Now. We have a panel of customers joining us today. So we have Michelle Burrell, who is from Kona Services. She is the manager of learning and development there at Kona. We've worked together for at least 5 years now on this journey. I have Rose Kane joining me as well from McCormick and Company. Global program manager. What you'll hear from Rose today is that, you know, where we started with Enable Now and some of the things she's doing is really in the success factor space, but also Translation Hub and some really cool things that they're doing. And then we have Mike Sidebottom from Comcast, learning experience designer. Lots of things that we've been doing there. The big thing for Comcast is they're not using this on top of SAP. It's all on non-SAP applications, which is really awesome for us. So as we get in the journey today and talk through this is who will be joining me. So I want to start a little bit with SAP and what's been going on and how the world's been changing. I think all of us are probably sick of these types of calls, right? Being on Zoom all the time, talking to each other remotely. Working from home. So 2020 was obviously like a year that none of us were expecting, right? Or even, used to working maybe in this environment. And that really impacts the training and learning and development space, right? I think it sped up the speed of digitalization of our training, making people go, maybe I can't do classroom training for everything. It's going to have to be a hybrid model. More on-screen help. So a lot of things were changing in the market, as well as just the complexity of IT, right? You're seeing a shift to cloud. I think all of the people on the phone today will be talking a little bit about, the impact of how often things are changing, right? So not just with SAP applications, but all the other applications that they're using, it's constant change. And how do we get training and education to those people? So we're going to go right into some questions. So today is going to be a panel conversation. I'm going to ask some questions of the people on the phone. We're going to have dialogue, and then, as you heard, use the Q&A to ask questions as we go through. So with the speed of digital transformation accelerating, so we have a lot of things changing really fast. How do you use your help? How do you help your end users today? So I'm going to start with Mike Sidebottom, and I just want, if you can give us an overview of, how are you helping your end users at Comcast today with all of the changes that you're dealing with constantly?
Yeah. Hey, thanks a lot, Jesse. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ways we could frame up, the past year, but certainly, the shift to faster digital adoption and just digital transformation is overwhelming, right? Like everything went digital overnight, and subsequently, right? I think we're still kind of struggling to keep pace with that and understand, what that really means for us as an organization, and even personally, right? Just as an experienced designer or an instructional designer. Just really kind of, what does that mean and how can I operate here? So, and look, like, I'll be the first to say, like, it's been challenging to just kind of, at least in my world, right, kind of make this digital transformation in a seemingly short amount of time. And also to stay relevant, stay modern, stay engaging, as we're making this shift. Like, first and foremost, I'll say I really empathize with end users, with all of us, right? Like, kind of in this digital world. I think some of us are more cut out for it than others. But we stare at computers for 8 hours a day. We have a lot less face-to-face interactions than we used to. And it feels like we're, kind of at the end of like this never-ending data stream of just everything, right? Everything is digital now. In part, I kind of see, or at least I've experienced this at times, as we've shifted into this just ultra digital world. It's kind of easy, like, at least for me, and again, I'll just say this personally, like the digital landscape, I feel, is actually becoming a little bit like oversaturated. And I don't know if that's possible, but it kind of feels that way because everything now is being delivered digitally, right? Content, the emails, notes, the job aids, just announcements, the amount of new teams and new platforms and new, communications vessels, and even learning to some degree is all now, kind of being forced through this digital funnel, which certainly has, a lot of good to it, but again, very much comes with some challenges.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
yeah,
And some questions from me, Michael, to you with what Comcast is doing from this engagement of this digital, this whole new kind of interaction with your end user. What are those things that you were doing to impact the end user, right? And was the end user important? I think as we started to shift to this new model of working and learning, how did you focus on that user that is in the system every day, right? Were you classroom before and then you switched to more, Enable Now, online screen help type of things, or did you go to work instructions, or did you go to like LMS assigning courses?
yeah, there's in all of it, right? All of it, I guess, is the easy answer. But yeah, I'd say, if I'm thinking kind of specifically about, maybe some of the larger onboarding programs we have, or the, the learning that used to be face to face, that is, was now digital, maybe more focusing on those users. And again, it's an interesting challenge because creating, again, like kind of in this context of this oversaturated digital landscape, right? Creating engaging content really, I don't personally think is quite enough anymore. I think like to really capture someone's attention at this point, not only does your content need to be consumer grade and check the boxes for L&D best practices, but it needs to be fun. It needs to be engaging. It needs to be aesthetically pleasing. It needs to be relevant and timely and all of those things. And so within that challenge, yeah, I'd say, a lot of the learning that we used to do, face to face, yeah, has really shifted to simulate, or a lot of it anyway, we've captured in the form of simulations. I'll say maybe this will help folks listening on the call too. So I've worked primarily supporting the operations space in Comcast. So EUC training is 80% of what goes on in that space of the myriad of Comcast tools we have. So right, a lot of that learning we used to do in person, all of it is now virtual. Yeah, and frankly, Enable Now has really allowed us to, Enable Now always allowed us to capture system processes when we didn't have QA environments or testing environments. But I think now, right, the ability to very quickly go out there and capture processes and simulations that really, again, don't exist outside of like screenshots and maybe some product owners, QA environment that they have, being able to capture that stuff and house it in either our LMS or CMS and provide kind of a YouTube dashboard for all of it has really been something that has, we've leaned into a lot over the past year, just to, again, keep granular assets, organized and timely and in place, but also make sure that they're ultra accessible for our end users.
Perfect. So Rose, I'm going to go to you with the same question. So how do you help your end users today? I know at McCormick, right, you were dealing with maybe some different issues than what Comcast was dealing with, but can you tell us a little bit of how did you help your end users, and maybe where were you focused, right, from a training development, end user enablement kind of space?
Yeah, absolutely. So McCormick, I would say, is a little bit behind the times when it comes to digital technology adoption, and it's something that has been a priority for our supply chain increasingly more. And as we looked at rolling out Web Assistant and Enable Now as a whole, we were actually using it to support the deployment of success factors. And we had 14,000 employees globally across 14 different languages that all needed to be trained on how to access success factors, and then how to also click on the question mark to get to the Enable Now training library and to get to Web Assistant. And so we took very much a crawl, run, walk approach, and we said, what is like the bare minimum that we need? What is the most user-friendly, user-intuitive way that we can build the framework and the course content? And how can we ensure that we have the right people in place to support it? So our approach has always been people first, and creating a subgroup of power users or super users that were familiar enough with the tool on a site-by-site level that when our employees got stuck, we actually had a person to help them. And so we created documentation and we took advantage of the QR codes that we could generate to really make it very self-service. But we also made sure that we had that personal touch for our employees who maybe struggle a little bit more with the computer literacy.
Yeah, perfect. So I'm going to kind of ask both of you this question before we move on to the next one. So end users, right? If we talk about end users, so both of you, I think now are engaged creating content, but do you think there's been a shift of we used to not focus on end user training, or has it always been important to focus on end user training, right? Did that shift happen because of tools you started to use, or were those items always there for you to kind of, make end users important? So Michael, if you want to start with that.
Yeah, totally. So personally, end users were always important to me because I was, years ago, I came from training delivery. So I've always had that passion for end users because frankly, like traditional end user training often leaves a lot to be desired, right? Like it's some of the driest, most challenging training, right, to make fun and engaging. So like for me, it was always kind of near and dear. Now I would say, I think there's more eyes on it. I think there's more awareness on how sticky of a subject that can be and how difficult it can be to execute well, especially again in an ultra digital environment. So So for us, right, I think, like some increased awareness up at higher levels, just in terms of like, how are we approaching this again, kind of holistically as an organization? How are we doing systems training? I think we've actually, in part because of this rapid, kind of digital acceleration we got put through, I think it's actually helped us align a little bit and have a little bit more empathy for our end users, because I think, again, when you really just look at how much pure end user, ops and tools kind of training goes on, inside of our organization, it's a massive, massive number of hours, massive number of tools. But yeah, I'd say honestly, it's really helped us to all kind of align around that. And kind of actually center on like Enable Now is like at least the go-to tool for, kind of like end user training.
Perfect. And Rose, for you, do you feel like the end user focus is more relevant now than it was, or do you feel like there was always that focus on your end user?
It is absolutely more relevant now because we're just interacting with so much more technology. So, 80% of our workforce is typically in a manufacturing or distribution center, and they are typically running machines. So they're not very connected to the softwares and the systems, and they don't need a lot of hands-on end user training. And when we started implementing some global technologies where it was now an expectation that all employees be connected and have the capability to execute specific tasks or transactions within those platforms, end user training became a non-negotiable. It was the only way we could be successful. And honestly, if it weren't for you and your support of getting Enable Now stood up, I don't think we would have been able to achieve the outcomes in such a tight time frame that we did. I know Web Assistant was really instrumental for us in doing that as well. We built very, very basic content in Web Assistant at first that was basically the top things that came in as tickets from end users, because we know we can build training, but as Michael said, it's not the most fun thing to be engaged with when it's just a basic end user training for a system or software. And so we knew we were going to need to do some kind of reinforcement on the end user training, and that's where we used Web Assistant really to step in and help with that. It is hard, it's a new way of working, and we worked closely with the change managers to make sure that we had a strong change management plan to get people used to the idea, because it was something that was relatively new for us, but it's going to continue to become the new norm.
Perfect. And there is a question that came in, and I'm going to ask it because it's perfect segue to what you were just talking to. And again, for all of those that are listening, you can put in a question in the Q&A applet. Just click on that button to add a question. But Rajiv is asking, so obviously you've done Web Assistant, right? And I know, Michael, you've done too. Mike, you've done it, third-party Web Assistant, which is, even newer for some people. But from a Web Assistant, Rose, for your perspective, it looks like they're having some challenges getting teams in other countries to adopt the Web Assistant. So did you have anything that you did to try to get them to implement it? He's talking about winning the implementing it in other countries. How did you get them to see the value? Because as we know that we're in there now, it's not this magical button that you go, I created it in English, now magically it's French, magically it's German, right? There is some effort, right? So can you talk a little bit about how you did that or made it work?
Yeah. So for us, Web Assistant was a pretty significant undertaking because we did, as Jesse said, have to translate all of the content and then make sure that the buttons or where the pieces were highlighted within Web Assistant were correct in the translated languages. And so we wanted to make sure that time investment was actually paying off for the organization. So the first thing that we did was instituted a pretty early on campaign just around communications, that Web Assistant existed, that it was there for you. It was that one-stop shop, immediate self-help, that you weren't going to be stuck waiting for other people. And we started to kind of build the value add proposition for the employee. So by using Web Assistant, you're able to solve the problem yourself. You're not stuck waiting for someone else to answer your ticket. We also, again, leaned into our power users. So those people at the local level who were familiar with how Web Assistant worked. And we got, 3 or so people per site if it was a smaller site, 6 or so if it was a larger site, to come to an instructor-led training on Teams where we talked about how Web Assistant worked and what the value of it was and why it was so great, sold them on that message, and then they became our site ambassadors to get people more used to using it. And the other thing that we did, which is not always a great idea, but it worked pretty well, was we started delaying ticket responses. So if people can always submit a ticket to get the answer without looking for the solution themselves, they're going to continue to do it. And so for things that we had already communicated that we knew that they could find easily in Web Assistant and they just weren't using it, we stopped answering right away. And the SLA went from 24 to 48 hours for tickets like that. And people started self-helping because they actually needed to know the answer. And then it started to catch on where, oh, Web Assistant is actually pretty great. We can actually use this tool. It's not really that hard. It's not scary anymore. And so that did help as well.
Perfect. Thanks, Rose. So I'm going to move into the next question. And there's another question that came in the Q&A panel, which we'll get to here in just a second. But as we move forward, I think what you heard from Mike and what you heard from Rose right now, this old world versus this new world of training, right? And the way we learn. If we think about, and I'm going to call it old world, right? When I started in the SAP world, we were doing R3 ECC, right? And now we're talking about S4 and cloud. So in the old world, we would have a project, it would take years to finish, right? Or a year to finish. We would start, have a blueprint session. We'd come up with a plan. We'd have training in there. You would have months to create training content. You would get that deployed. You would have classes, right? You had this complex training strategy, right? And now in the new world, with things changing constantly, I think we're all trying to, how do we adopt and adapt to this new way, right? How do we make the training relevant for people that when they click on it, it is the right information at the right time, but also up to date. So this idea of continuous learning and constant updates is definitely a shift in the way that we need to think about learning and training. And I think what Rose was just talking about with the Web Assistant being embedded in the tool on top of the screen, it's a way for you to take, content that maybe you didn't even create with Enable Now. Maybe you use Captivate, maybe you use Camtasia, maybe you use Articulate, maybe you use Storyline, right? There's all these other tools in the training toolbox. So what we're seeing is how it's not so important to me what tool you're using. It's more important to me that we're getting it on top of the screen real time to the people, right? So with the Web Assistant, you could put in a Word document. With the Web Assistant, you could put a PowerPoint in there, or you could put a link to a SharePoint, right? So it's kind of a way to deliver that content directly on the screen, kind of at that point in time, right? And that's what we're really seeing, the shift for us at SAP, but even the shift in the marketplace. And there's other tools in the marketplace that are in the same space starting to play, with this digital adoption platform or adapt solution, and how is that working? So with that, I'm going to go into the next question. So with the speed of digital transformation, again, accelerating, I'm going to start with you, Michelle, on this question. So Michelle is joining us from Kona Services. So what does your toolbox look like? So I just talked about some other tools here a second ago, but I want people to understand that for most training organizations, it's not a one tool answers all the questions, right? So what's in your toolbox at Kona Services to help end users get training?
Well, thanks, Jesse. But at Kona, we're a unique because we are a IT services group. So we support all the bottlers within, the US and Canada as well. And within each of those bottlers, they have their own L&D teams, and each of those L&D teams may have a Captivate or a Storyline or some other resource that they use to create content. So Kona is the go-to place that they go to get the content common across all the bottlers. And then it's up to them to decide on, if they want to take it and adapt it, make changes to it. But then they also have their own tool sets outside of Kona that they do use to create content as well, or add to the existing content that we do create in Kona. So some of them do use that, and they use Enable Now as a place to house most of the content. And that content can be anything from SCORM files to videos to PDFs to Word documents, team meetings that they've recorded and they need a place for them to go. We all put that inside of what we call our Kona Academy or an Enable Now for their individual work areas. And that's kind of where they access all that information. And they use that as, QR codes or links to other places to share out the content, or they put it in success factors, depending on which tool the bottlers have in their wheelhouse. With that being said, we also share content across us. So we do use a lot of sharing from one bottler to another, or from Kona to others. So that is also helpful as well. And then because we're agile, we're always adding content on a monthly basis because our sprints are 4 weeks. So we're always adding content as things are released. So that is also another thing that we use within our toolbox.
Great. And I think for a lot of people to know, right, from Michelle's perspective, being Kona Services, so the Coke bottling arm, right? So if you think about Coke and all the bottling and cans and things that you get in your stores, those are all done by different bottlers across the globe, but across North America is what Michelle is supporting. There was a question that came in. I'm going to ask you this before we go to Michael. So you talk about some content that you distribute, but are you using any of the standard content? So one thing that someone's asking is there BPPs, which is business process documents for T-code usage? So the answer to that is yes, there is standard content. It used to be called knowledge acceleration, and now you can actually get to that for free if you own Enable Now. The one thing I would say is go out to the Enable Now community site, obviously, and you'll see a section on the side where you can find this content, and you can actually click and open it. But if you had Enable Now, you could modify it. So Michelle, to you, you're kind of doing this, right? You're creating the standard content and distributing it. But are you using any of our standard content, or are you just creating a library for your people and distributing it to 13 companies?
Actually, we do have a couple projects that just recently came up, one being the Ariba project that we did look at the content. We did bring that into our work areas, and we're looking at it to see what we can use and what we can modify and add to. So we are using existing content that you have out there. And then as other projects come along, because we are doing other SAP projects, we are looking into using the content more. So, which is very helpful because it helps me with getting a lot of this, with the creation of a lot of the content that's already there and just adjusting it to fit, whatever it needs to fit into. So that is very helpful.
Perfect. So Michael, to you, what else is in your toolbox? So obviously, I know you have lots of years of experience in the L&D space or learning and development space. What's in your toolbox at Comcast?
Oof, it's a big one. So if I think about larger structures, right, larger curriculum, onboarding programs, flagship programs, right, we have a couple different softwares for portals and journeys. We have 2 softwares for ebooks. We use Articulate Rise and Inkling for that. And again, as we kind of just get smaller, down to like kind of the asset level, again, to summarize, I'll just say we lean into the Adobe Creative Suite, Storyline, Camtasia, and one that's honestly relatively new and not thrown around with a lot of the names I just threw around, but really leaning into the Training Arcade as a kind of in-the-box gamified learning solution as well. But again, that extends out to like writing HTML code and programming JavaScript and, you know, interacting with APIs to again, kind of going back to your point, Jesse, right? This tech ecosystem, right? Like how do we connect it all? And so often, right, we're doing some of the more complex stuff like writing code or interacting with APIs just to allow things to communicate. So it really is a big tool bag, but there's kind of an interesting point that I wanted to bring up here, which is in a couple of recent like kind of project scoping calls I've been in that have been for a tool or a system. I've actually seen, like in these new tools, I've seen tool owners actually trying to add their own in-app support, right? Like adding their own little question mark and then having their own little help section slide out. And it makes me happy, right? Because I think they're going in the right direction, but it's often, it leaves so much to be desired. And it's often, you know, it seems like maybe it was added to the backlog relatively early, you know, in the project, but ultimately it's not something that's scalable. It's not something that, you know, is being maintained. To Michelle's point, it's not, you know, it's not having new content added monthly. But I see this trend, right? This shift to move out from these, again, kind of these traditional, you know, learning platforms and apps that we use to create, you know, whether it's a learning nugget or a much larger structure, right? I really do sense this shift to bringing that into the app in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, and again, I think that gives us a great place to obviously, you know, talk about Web Assistant. And I really resonate with one point you brought up earlier too, which is, again, kind of going back to that tech ecosystem. The Web Assistant is a platform for that, right? Like there's often a lot of concern about, well, what about the formal training? You know, what about the formal e-learning that we just put in our LMS? It's beautiful that we can marry all that inside the Web Assistant. Again, very seamlessly, very organically, just link out to the assets that maybe do need to live external. You know, if we need to link out to the LMS course. But even taking that a step further and using the Lightbox ability of Web Assistant to actually bring external pages and external assets into the application the user's using right on top of the screen. Like those little things, I think, are what help that cohesion between this tech ecosystem and help that overall experience for that user stay engaging, right? Like stay consumer grade, stay clean. So yeah, just kind of an interesting point, yeah, because we, again, on the Comcast end, we all of our Enable Now usage is to support third-party tools, whether they're our own or the apps we use, and so, right. I think as as these new tools come out, Web Assistant very much seems to be kind of the trend, and frankly, it's the newest tool in our tool bag, right? It's something that we're really still trying to pilot and explore and develop, but every day that goes on, there's seems to be kind of a bigger ask for it, as well as just more opportunities to to find these places where you have the right business partners that need to scale quickly, etc. Tools that change rapidly monthly.
And Mike, to that point, and there's a question coming in from Neil on exactly what you're talking about. So from Web Assistant for you on non-SAP systems, there's a question on did you encounter issues and with context or getting things to work on the screen? So could you describe a little bit like what you're doing with Web Assistant on non-SAP systems? And right, it wasn't perfect. I will be the first one to admit it wasn't perfect. I think it's got better. But can you kind of describe, kind of what's going on in that non-SAP space with Web Assistant?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is probably 18 months ago. I think as SAP very kind of first started to roll out third-party Web Assistant, we jumped on board because we saw the value, and B, I think that was really kind of our end goal all along, was to get some sort of performance support, whether it's desktop assistant or the Web Assistant, to get some version of that for our own tools. So we do use Web Assistant and all of Enable Now, again, pretty much exclusively for homebrew tools, formal applications that we use, like the Salesforces and those kinds of things. But it's all with our own content. And again, and primarily it's within tools that we're actually developing ourselves. So again, a little bit different kind of jumping off point for us. Going back to like our first attempt at implementation, it was complex, right? And I think there's a lot of the complexity is the fact that we had to bring in tool owners and developers to integrate code, and lacking some of the right expertise and the right people at the right meetings, I think made that really difficult. Also, again, dealing with a massive vendor on a massive flagship kind of software that we were building. There were some challenges, to say it lightly. We absolutely ran into some challenges just with iframes and the complexity of the tools that we were building, and obviously how at a technical level Enable Now is able to interact with that. But long story short, Web Assistant has come a long way, as well as we've come a long way on our learning journey, just as well as kind of understanding this and doing some pilots and getting it implemented. But just to again kind of summarize this, I mean, we're at a point now where Web Assistant is really, we no longer have this requirement to have code implemented in the tool software itself, which easily removes the biggest hurdle to getting Web Assistant actually integrated in a tool and people excited about using it and getting SMEs involved with the easy, rapid content creation. So it's come a long way. And frankly, with some of the newer enhancements that have come out, over the past couple of months with Web Assistant, this is now a tool that we can literally just recommend alongside a formal e-learning or, a traditional simulation, Enable Now simulation, whatever it may be. This is all now completely within our control. We don't need developers to use it. And subsequently, again, I think there's a lot of people excited now that this is essentially, right? Like, if I look at the development time of how long it might take to turn on a Web Assistant at this point versus, do like a formal e-learning or training program, the investment's pretty similar. And again, I think if we look a little bit down the road at long-term payoff and really just how our users want to consume content, I think it sets us up in a great shape to really, really kind of drive Web Assistant and our third-party apps large,
Perfect.
Large scale into next year.
Yeah, for sure. And there was a question from Rajiv again, and I'm just going to answer it because it's pretty simple. But Michael did use both Desktop Assistant and Web Assistant. So similar to what you heard Rose talking about, this crawl, walk, run approach. I think what was interesting with Michael and Mike at Comcast was that they went from a desktop assistant to just kind of prove out what does on-screen help look like, and then started to play more in the Web Assistant space just for ease of deployment, right? So they
100%.
have played with both, right? So I think it's kind of that crawl, walk, run, right? So some people do desktop assistant, but I would say for anyone who's joining the call now, I think what we're starting to see from SAP is we're seeing a shift to go to Web Assistant first versus before we'd have to tell you to go to Desktop Assistant if it was non-SAP. Perfect. All right, so we have more questions coming in, but we're going to go to the next question. I want to talk a little bit about this, and then we're going to move into the next question to Rose and Michelle. So when we look at what does learning enable, so this whole idea of, we're creating stuff with Enable Now, you're creating content, we're putting it out in these different tools, you're using your toolbox of things that you now have as a L&D professional at your organization. You heard Rose talk a little bit about this already, right? The reducing support calls. So I think sometimes people think of training and then you get stuck in this idea of, I just am trying to show people how to use the system, instead of take the approach of where are people struggling and then go build training to help reduce support, right? So sometimes what happens, especially in this performance support space, where you go live, you did train them before, they're still struggling. Does my training content actually help them do what they're trying to do? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Maybe they didn't really pay attention to the training that we rolled out at the beginning. But think about how you could improve help desk or your support center, or if you get tickets that come in, how could you reduce that with training, right? And focus on that, and maybe put that training directly in the tool with Web Assistant or with even a simulation recording or something that you could actually send out. And then looking at those value drivers for end users, right? So how can we provide value to the end user? And obviously, I was an end user. I think a lot of you on the phone are probably an end user to some system at some point in your life. But think about all those things that you're like, I wish I could just find what I needed to do what I need to do right on the screen right now, right? Or I wish I could find the answer without going to Joe who sits next to me and have to ask him everything that I need to do in my job, right? So very often what ends up happening is we just go to that person who knows everything and don't try to find the answer on our own. So you heard a little bit about that from Rose on how learning can really start to bring some efficiency to your organization, not just from an L&D perspective, but really from a training organization. So the other thing too that's super interesting right now is there's so many things changing, right? Like the amount of new platforms, I'm going to call them the shiny objects, right? Think about all the new software that you're constantly buying. I always feel like it's like, oh my God, it's a new shiny object. Let's go buy it and implement it, right? So if we think about the people today, right, 2 out of 3 students or 2 out of 3 end users will have a job that don't even exist, right? So every person at your company, right, if you think about it, 2 out of 3 of them will probably have a different job that doesn't even exist in your company today, right? So if you think about things you implemented, if we even use Rose as an example or Michelle as an example, Rose was doing SuccessFactors, right? SuccessFactors wasn't there 10 years ago, right? So it's a new job that now exists at McCormick that is now being focused on. And we also have the challenge of we have 1 billion workers, right, that need to be reskilled and trained, right? So from an L&D and training perspective, how do we, go and really make a change to what's happening? So I'm going to start with Rose on this one. We haven't heard from Rose, and we're going to go to Michelle on this one too. But if you could change one thing about your training organization, if you had all the power, what would it be? So if you think about all those challenges you had, if you could change one thing, right? If you were in charge of everything, you're the CEO, CIO, whoever it is that makes all these decisions, what would you change about your training organization if you had all the power?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally for me, the thing that I wished McCormick had, or like any company had for really successful training, is super actively committed sponsorship at the top. And I think that it from a change management perspective, we've seen a lot of studies that prove that, you need really engaged sponsorship, and the more engaged your executives are in coaching and modeling the behavior and communicating and putting value in committing to the change, the more likely people are to take it seriously. And I think that training needs that too. I know for us organizationally, we will commit to putting out a new software or to following a new process, but the executive sponsorship could be stronger. And I think that if it were, then we would see, a cascade effect where their direct reports, their teams would also see the value in the training and would take the time to make training a priority. Oftentimes what happens for us is we'll build the training material, we'll look at, the tickets that come in, and we'll say, what are the needs that people are experiencing? Okay, that's what we'll focus on, that's what we'll build. And we still aren't seeing really significant completion rates or really, really significantly moving a needle through training alone. And I think a lot of it is because people are so concerned about getting their day jobs finished that it's hard to take the time to set aside to really learn a new system or learn a new process. And so for me, it all comes back to really, really committed executives.
Awesome. Thanks, Rose. And I think that's one thing that people, right? I think a lot of the people in training space today, it usually becomes a job that you didn't necessarily think you were going to have, right? It's like I'm helping roll something out, and all of a sudden magically I'm the training person, right?
Yep.
Right. It's like I didn't go to school to be an instructional designer. I'm going to try to figure this out. And to your point, the more top-down support, the easier it is for you when you're trying to go, I really need you to take this training course, or I really need you to take this training before go live, and it not just be looked at like whatever, it's another thing that I'm not going to do because I don't have time, right?
Yeah.
So I think you're spot on. So Michelle, same question to you. If you could change one thing about your training organization, if you had all the power, and I know you're kind of in a different situation than Rose, because you are kind of coordinating things for 13 different companies fundamentally. What would you change? What if you had all the power to like control this training organization, what would you change?
It's similar to what Rose said, everything she said and more. Basically, understanding that, training is an ongoing process. So even though, you rolled out HR and it's done and it's complete, there's still changes that need to be made, updates that need to be made, things get changed, things are upgraded. And just because they used it, the first time, an understanding of, as things get upgraded, so does the training needs, things need to be either removed or updated or, added to new screens or whatever it is, so that the content doesn't become stale. So just trying to get a hold of that and get everyone to understand that, because you run into where a lot of the subject matter experts are like, oh, that's easy, they can do that, they don't need training for that. Well, they've lived it day by day or whatever, because they've implemented it, but they don't understand that the user does need that training, does need that support, and will need that content to be able to, do whatever the job is. So just an understanding of that is probably in addition to what Rose said. So
perfect. So interesting question. This just came in from Emmett, and I think all of you have had challenges, but it said, did any of the panelists experience challenges developing their content? And if so, what did you do and how did you overcome them? So if Rosa, I don't know if you want to start with this, and I think every one of you, right? I don't think any of you on this call right now did not have some type of challenge when we were first starting the Enable Now journey. But Rose, do you want to kind of talk to, did you have challenges? Because I know you did.
I always like to joke that my life is like Murphy's Law when it comes to training. Any challenge that can exists and is inevitably going to come up. And so I think for us, one of the hardest things we had was when we were implementing SuccessFactors, we had a non-negotiable delivery date, and training wasn't brought in until 2.5 months before that delivery date. So it was a significant lift in a really, really tight timeline with no resources. And we didn't actually have the platform up and running fully. We had purchased Enable Now as a part of an S/4HANA implementation that was then put on hold with COVID, and the person that was in charge of Enable Now left our organization. Like, when I say every problem that we could have had, we had. Single sign-on wasn't working, and so it was very challenging for us. But I think from a training development perspective, the hardest part was just making sure that we actually knew what the process was. So as Michael has mentioned before with simulations, we made a lot of those. That was actually how we did most of our training for the new processes, because we felt that people being able to see in the live system how to do the transactions and what the boxes were going to look like in advance of the system actually going live was our best bet at getting people trained up and comfortable. So we took a simulation approach. We created about 65 simulations based on the key processes that the program team had identified. And as they were moving through testing, we were developing the training content because we could not wait. If we had waited until IT or UAT testing was finished, we would have had 2 weeks to build 60 simulations. It was tight. So we were building the plane and flying it. And the challenge that we ran into was that the process would change and we weren't told that the process had changed. So in testing, they realized that a particular field didn't autofill the way that it had been mapped to do, or that a particular role couldn't do a transaction that they were expected to be able to do, or because of an internal audit issue, or because of a language translation issue, something happened and the process changed. A required field became optional, or an optional field became required. And we did not have a fully functional change process to document when those changes happened as a part of the project team. And so then me as the training manager didn't get that information and didn't get the simulations updated as the changes were happening. So we had a lot of challenges with either the test instance of the platform where we were creating the training content didn't match what was going to be the live instance, because the project team said, oh, we don't need to make the change in the test instance, we'll just fix it in production, not thinking about the fact that training would reflect the test instance, so it did need to be updated. Or they just didn't tell us that the process changed at all, and it was caught by happenstance in later reviews or after we went live. So for us, that was one of the biggest challenges we've had.
Yeah, and I think one thing too that for people to hear, as Rose said earlier, and I want to keep pointing this out, take a crawl, walk, run approach, right? And I feel like a lot of people, when they go into Enable Now, want to immediately go to run, right? They like, I want web assistant, I want everything integrated, I'm going to use standard content, I want to update, right? They want to like go to like, yes, the ideal perfect implementation of Enable Now. And I think you got to get a base understanding of Enable Now. There are training and courses you can take. Rose leveraged some consultants to come in to help train them on what was going on, right? So really, if you go to the Enable Now community, there's a lot of information on there of, we have now a spot where we have adoption series you can go sign up for on demand. Yeah. We have, info center help out there. I would say, like, when Rose was starting her journey, we were just starting this community and getting a lot of people to engage. When Michelle and Michael were starting, I would say the only thing Michelle really had was the info center, right? I mean, that was it. And same for Michael, right? It was me in the info center. That was really the answer. So same. I'll ask you two the same question, but Michelle, from struggling with the tool at first, what were some of the things that you ran into that you were able to overcome?
Just getting adoption to the tool. So, before it was just Kona, and with all the other work areas, trying to get the ballers on board about using it and showing everybody, especially the subject matter experts, because we really don't have a big learning and development team. So I rely on them to create a lot of the content. So for all the different solutions, to show them, here's how you create it, and here's the user guide that comes out, because they were usually, doing Word screenshots and adding the steps, and then just showing them, here, just record the simulation that you have to walk through anyway to get the screen shots. Just do that, and then it outputs what you're looking for. So once they got the notion that they could do that, that made life a lot easier for them. And also the bottlers, just showing them how easy it was to import and export content, and how they could use it for other things, not just, SAP or CONA. They can use it for whatever other tools that they have in their house, things like that. That was huge. So.
Perfect. Thanks. So I want to move on to the next question. So if we look at, learning is our leverage in the cloud. If we think about what's going on with, as I said, the old world versus new world, what would be some of the best advice to give to leadership about training, right? About, if I want to go down this Enable Now path, and say you were now in a position, I don't own Enable Now, and I have all this knowledge, all of you have this knowledge that you've gained around the Enable Now tool. What would be something that you would want your leadership to understand and care about when you're trying to go down this path, right? So again, Rose, I know you have a lot of examples of this, but Michelle, I'm going to start with you. Is there something that you learn now with Enable Now that you go, if I left Kona Services and I go to another company and we're looking at Enable Now as a package, what would be something you'd want leadership to care about?
Rapid content, getting content on demand, that it's available immediately, and time. I mean, a lot of time is given back to where you were doing a lot of manual stuff or things like that, that now it's a lot easier by using the tool, because it's outputting so much content that you don't have to go to 10 different tools to create this content. Is just there in one spot. So time is huge, and the subject matter experts see it, that it gives them a lot of time that they didn't have before, to create, testing documents or user guides and things like that. So.
Perfect. So time, that's spot on. Rose, what about you? What, if you leave McCormick, you go somewhere else, what would you tell leadership when they're going, I'm trying to figure out what to purchase, and Enable Now might be it? What would you say? This is why you should care.
So I would say, I think Michelle's spot on. My statement was going to be the value that it saves the company over time. And one of the best ways to do it is to show how much time you're saving your employees. I think for us, Enable Now as a simulation library and a reference library is actually easier to search for an answer than it is to submit a ticket to help desk, and to be able to show that value to people, that, not only are you saving your subject matter experts time and your support team time, but you're also saving your employees, because now they're not sitting there trying to figure out, how do I put in the ticket? What is the right category that I choose? Oh, I chose the wrong category, so now the option I'm looking for isn't there. They can literally just search.
Yep.
And it makes things so easy. And I think it also, one of the most underappreciated components of Enable Now is that it actually changes the way people think. And so it gets your employees to start thinking about more self-motivation and self-accountability for solving their own problems. You no longer have people who are consistently putting in tickets and saying, I need you to come and do this for me. It's, oh, I can do this for myself. Let me figure out how to do this for myself. And that switch in mindset is actually something that we really need as an organization, and we value as an organization as we look at the digital transformation.
Perfect, thanks. So what I want to get to now, we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to get to the questions that are in the panel. So one of them that's in here is talking about migrating content, moving from one tool to another one. So they say we use UPerform for several existing trainings, or migrating, recreating everything, which is time consuming. So Michelle, I know you guys went from a SEMA into Enable Now. Michael, I don't know, I don't think there was really, for you, there wasn't a direct use case of like going from one tool to another tool.
Yep.
But I know, Michelle, you had a SEMA, right, which is
Mhm.
similar to like a UPerform, and went to Enable Now. So can you talk a little bit about your approach there, from what you did, from how did you bring your content over, and then how did you prioritize what to recreate?
Well, we couldn't bring the content over, so we ended up having to recreate all of the content, and which
Mhm.
was a good thing too, because we got rid of some of the content that was no longer needed. And then at the same time, we had Canada coming on board, so we needed to do translations in French. So all of that kind of happened at the same time, which was a perfect storm. But so we were able to select which content that was needed, primarily because of the transition to Canada and what we needed to put into French. So that kind of drove a lot of the priorities. And then after that, we just kind of looked at overall the different areas and decided on what was important and kind of what wasn't. And then all the other content would come later on after. So
Perfect. So I'm going to ask Michael this question. I have someone who's asking, how do you keep all your Enable Now content up to date? So Todd's asking a question of, how much is the content in Enable Now up to date? What is your strategy to keep content current and useful in Enable Now?
Yeah, so kind of, I guess I'll give like an old world, new world answer, because this is kind of rapidly evolving for us. In the old world, we worked in kind of a college structure inside of Comcast. So, inside that college, it's kind of like an end-to-end program manager. It was basically like a single, POC to kind of, that was basically managing these programs, including the life cycle. That came with its own pros and cons, but I'd say in general, like much easier just to, sink into a certain channel or a body of work and just stay up to date and in tune with, what needs to be updated. Over the past year, we've really shifted into a unified learning organization inside of Comcast. And at this point now, we actually have, dedicated product managers that are, that have consistency checks, right? Like timely quarterly checks that they go do to actually make sure our content is updated. And it's kind of, I guess, it almost leaks back into the previous question, right? Like one of the challenges we faced is like having an existing tech ecosystem and trying to bring Enable Now into that was certainly kind of a challenge, right? It's just a new tool to our space. We didn't go out and from the high levels, we didn't go out and spot Enable Now and bring it in and have, executive sponsorship. It really kind of started from the ground up. So building that bench strength across the large organization and in building, what I'll call kind of like master authors, or really expert level authors, has really been something that at first was a challenge, right? It required a lot of time, flying out to some SAP trainings, et cetera, et cetera. But I'd say now that we have that bench strength and we have some SMEs that can, go out and share knowledge with their teams, it fits very, very nicely kind of into our product lifecycle management. And again, with how easy it is to update content in either, whether we're talking about the web assistant, in-app support, or even just regular simulations, right? Like Enable Now has it all. It makes that part of it really easy, right? Recognizing that tools are changing very rapidly as well. So.
Yep, for sure. So I'm going to go through some of the questions. We have about 5 minutes left. So I wanted to make sure everyone, if you've never seen Enable Now, I have some things on the screen right now for interactive e-learnings, storyline type content, simulation content, which would be more like the Captivate Camtasia type content. And one of the questions that's out there is, why didn't you all use just one tool, right? Why did you continue to use Captivate, PowerPoint, and Word, et cetera? And I think for not just the 3 customers we have on the phone today, but for a lot of customers, they tend to make like a matrix, right? So if you think about like, I only am going to create an e-learning that has nothing to do with the system. Maybe I'm going to call it soft skill training. So I'm going to create an e-learning to show people how to take a customer call, right? And it's not really a recording of screen. Those are things where I see customers go, well, I'm going to go use Storyline to do that versus Enable Now, because Enable Now gives you the benefit of, I'm going to record something in a tool, like a system application screen recording, and then I'm going to turn it into a whole bunch of different things, right? So where I see an L&D organization and why they have different tools, it may be a group only creates high quality video and that's all they do. And when I say high quality video, it has people talking and it's someone interacting with this with people, and they go to a different tool to do that versus Enable Now. So when we think about why are they not using just Enable Now for everything, it really has to do with, what are you trying to do? And I think one of the answers that we see a lot of time if you have Enable Now is, if you are going to do a screen recording, why would you not use Enable Now instead of going, I'm going to create the simulation in Captivate, I'm going to create my walkthrough in WalkMe and put that on the screen, I'm going to go create something else with Captivate, I'm going to go create a quiz with a different tool, right? So the idea of one-time recording to do all these things is really a benefit from that perspective. So that's what I would really see from all the people on the phone today and others. It's why they have other things in their tool bag. From a web assistant perspective, if you haven't seen it, I'm just going to pull up some things here real quick. Let me go back. From a web assistant perspective, it's basically the question mark on the screen. You're getting this carousel. The carousel can be used to host and put other content in. So if you had a PDF document from UPerform, you could put it in the carousel. If you had a Captivate instruction, you can put it in the carousel, right? The carousel is just a way for us to get the context sensitive to the screen and make sure the users are getting the right things at the right time. So just kind of know that if you've never seen the web assistant, this is what we're talking about. Some people see it as a question mark. Some people just go, I click on this and it opens up, but I have no idea it's Enable Now. But really that's what we're talking about from that perspective. So know that is what the web assistant is. Some quick follow-up things that I just want to put out there. Again, Tech Ed will be coming up sooner than later. We have opensap.com, which is a open platform for you to go get some more free and additional training. There is a course out there for Enable Now, but it's a platform for all types of SAP content. There is also micro learnings that are starting to be put out there. So go take a look at opensap.com. It has changed quite a bit in the last year of the type of content that's being created and used. From a Learning Hub perspective, again, if you're trying to learn Enable Now, there are courses there. From a Tech Ed perspective, if you were a Tech Ed attendee from last year, you can still go out and take tracks. If you sign up for Tech Ed this year, which again, as you saw with Sapphire and other events that we have, you now can usually sign up for free, and then you're going to be able to go in and consume some training and education there. And then from the cloud platform, so I had someone ask a question, I want to be able to demo and show this. One of the best things to do, go search for SAP free cloud trial systems. The S/4HANA cloud trial system has the web assistant built in, or the Enable Now piece built in, and it's a great showcase of what is possible with web assistant in an SAP landscape. So go take a look at that as well. We have about 1 minute left, and what I want to do before we close is just thank Rose, Mike, and Michelle for their time today. I appreciate your feedback. We've all been on this journey together now, some of you for at least 5 years, some of you for 2 to 3 years. But I appreciate you sharing your stories. I think they're helpful for everyone to hear, I say the truth, right? Unfiltered truth about what's going on with Enable Now. But I, again, thank you for your time today. And with that, I think we will close out the call. But again, thank you everyone for attending.
Thanks for having us, Jesse.
Yeah,
Thanks,
you're
Jesse.
welcome.
Thank you.
And any additional questions can be posted in the community Q&A forum, so other community members can learn from them too. So yeah, thank you guys. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you everyone for coming, and I hope to see you guys at future community calls.